Okay, this is like take 6. When you go to court on these traffic tickets or anything, the state is often claiming to be the plaintiff. And
Yes, they're allowed to do that.
so anyways, I was up listening to Mark Stevens and putting together some definition of words. And I found, I've known what Mark Stevens saying. I've been telling people the state doesn't exist for years, but
That's just blatantly wrong.
I didn't um, I was able to articulate it because it's a corporation. Every state is incorporated, just like the United States of America Corporation.
They're incorporated in the sense that they came to exist as entities, but they are not private for-profit corporations, which is an entirely different thing.
Military industrial.
Like a city can become incorporated, and what that means is it becomes part of the greater whole of the area around it, right? Like if your town or village or whatever becomes incorporated, it means it is being recognized as a legal entity by larger organizations in that jurisdiction. Okay? That doesn't mean you are a corporation in the colloquial sense.
Complex owned by the goddamn Brits or whoever, the bankers. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, aside from that, the state has always been a fiction. But how do you prove the state's a fiction? Other than the fact...
I mean, what do you mean the state is a fiction? It's a social construct, but that doesn't make it fictional, right? It's still something that means something and affects our lives. The state is what we call the apparatus of power, in the United States at least, controlled by the constituents via representative democracy, right? And then we have branches of government that have different levers of power, that do all sorts of different things. That's the state, right? It's a social construct, but it's a real thing. It's a definition that it describes material conditions. It's real.
Some douchebag in a suit comes in and says, I represent the state, and then you see, wait a minute, where's the state at then? If there's supposed to be a real party in interest, let me face my accuser.
You are. You are. Someone is representing the state. The prosecutor is representing the state in prosecuting you.
Oh, you can't do that. The state is sovereign. The state has sovereign immunity. You can't sue the state.
You can sue the state. You can sue the United States. You could sue the state you live in. If you live in Michigan, you could sue the state of Michigan. You could sue a city or a county. You can do that. You need to have grounds for doing so, but you can do it.
Well, if you can't sue the state, how's that double standard going to handle the other way around, where the state is suing you? Like, if I can't sue somebody else, then how is it they can sue me?
Right, but they're not suing you in the civil sense. They're charging you with a criminal offense, which is a different thing.
They can't. It's fucking bullshit. So aside from that, let's keep going. Let's look at the definition of state, and let's see in our own,
There's nothing funny
with
about
our
the
own
tools of
eyes,
capitalism.
how the state has no jurisdiction or authority over us, because we are not state employees. We are not part of the body politic. Okay? The Supreme Courts have already established the fact that they have no duty to protect us. If we have, look at Mark Stevens. He puts it out simply. There is no state. There is no citizen. If there was a citizen, then they would have a duty to protect us. They don't. So we have no duty of allegiance. So let's look at this.
That's not how it works. That's not how it works.
Definition of state is the political system of a body of people who are politically organized. The system of rules by which jurisdiction and authority are exercised over such a body of people. And then it says separation of church and state. Second one. An institution of self-government within a larger political entity, especially one of the constituent parts of a nation having a federal government. And then it gives an example to 50 states. And then 3, often cap, the people of a state collectively considered as the party wronged by a criminal deed, especially the prosecution as the representative of the people. And then it gives an example. The state rests its case. Okay, so who is the state now?
The state is the government of whatever thing you're talking about. If you're talking about the federal state here, we're talking about the United States government. If we're talking about an individual state in the Union, then you're talking about the government of that state. There can be representatives of said government. It's not difficult to understand. I mean, if you get down to, like, the philosophical, like, oh, what is the state? Sure, I understand that that's a discussion that could be had, but that's not what you're doing. You're trying to, like, you're trying to philosophize the state out of existence when you can't, because it's just a descriptor of a real thing that we use to organize our lives, right? Like, you can get all, like, esoteric and be like, man, what even is the state, man? But at the end of the day, the state exists, right? It exists. The police exist. The courts exist. The legislative exists. The executive exists. These are people with power and the authority to use that power to enforce laws. That's what makes it real, right? You can't just be like, man, I don't even think the state's real, man. It is. It is. It is whether you want it to or not. You don't have to like it. I'm not telling you that. And if you want to make change, you can. We have electoral politics in this country, and you should be able to go and change things with either spending your time to go and donate your time or money to certain candidates who will represent you and change laws or whatever. That's fine. You can change things. You can dislike the government as it currently stands. I do to certain extents, and I think everyone has things that they'd like to change about the government and the way society functions as a whole. But you don't get to just wish it out of existence because you don't like it. That's not how it works.
The state is a political system of a body of people who are politically organized. Is that you?
That's the government. You're describing the government.
Are you a state employee?
You don't have to be an employee to have the authority of the state apply to you. The state has authority over defined areas that they have, right? In the United States, it would be in any of the 50 states or territories of the United States. You're a citizen, or if you're just in the landmass, you don't even have to be a citizen. You could be visiting or whatever. The law applies to you, and that's the same everywhere on Earth. Wherever you are, there's probably a local government of some type, whether it's, you know, a government like the United States, or if it's a small local government, or if it's a warlord. It doesn't matter. Wherever you are, there's probably someone enforcing some sort of rules. Not all of those rules are just, not all of those rules are fair, but they are what they are, right? Again, you don't have to like something to recognize that it exists.
Are you politically organized with the state? The state is this body of people. So that reminds me, going back to the Constitution. It said, you go back to the Constitution says, we the people. So who are the people? It's them, not us. That's where separation of church and state comes from. We, public people, we're not public. We're not part of their system. We're not political. We're not a P. We are people who are free and separate from the state. That is a fiction. It's a fiction to us. So that
It's not a fiction. It's a descriptor of real things.
That would leave us to be church in this example.
What? No, people aren't church. Church is religion. Church is the Christian church, the Catholic church, Protestant churches. In the Constitution, they put the separation there so you couldn't, like, have a state-imposed religion, and also the state couldn't, like, you know, infringe on the rights of people to practice whatever religion they want. That's a good thing. People are not the church. What are you talking about?
Separation of church and state. State is them. Bar associates. Politicians. Anybody politically organized. We are not politically organized. We are slaves. We are church. So how do they pull us in? They get us to enter into social contract. What is a social contract? Social contract, page 699.
The social what? Page 690. There's not, I mean, there might be some document out there or a paper or a book called the social contract. I'm almost certain there is. But like when we're talking about the social contract, colloquially, we don't literally mean something that you can go and cite. We mean, you know, the idea that there's these agreements in society, right? The agreements being, hey, like, we will respect your rights as long as you also respect the fact that you have responsibilities. Those responsibilities being things like, I will obey the law. If you break that social contract and break the law, then the government can come to you and be like, okay, we're putting you in jail. It's going to take away a lot of the things that we deem freedoms, your rights, but you broke your end of the social contract, therefore we're going to put you away. It's not like a literal thing. The social contract isn't a literal document you sign. It's just a descriptor of social forces that we apply to one another in society.
The express or implied agreement between citizens and their government by which individuals agree to surrender certain freedoms. It does not say rights. I'll show you where the rights come from. Are you ready? In exchange for mutual protection. Oh, wait a minute. What protection? You mean the protection that the Supreme Court has already ruled they have no obligation to give us? Oh, man. This is an agreement forming the foundation of a political society. Now, we've already talked about what a political society is. The political society is the state. The people of the state are politically organized. They have a system of rules by which their jurisdiction and authority are exercised over themselves, because they are an institution of self-government. Get it? Now, where do these civil rights arguments come from? Well, it comes from being a citizen. How can you be a citizen if you are not getting mutual protection? I have no idea. Anyways.
The idea that, like, citizenship requires the government to inherently protect you is odd, and I don't know where he's getting that from. Like, don't get me wrong, I think American society should be based upon the idea that there's a give and take between the state and the people, right? Like, it would be great if the police would, you know, actually protect you and not infringe on your rights. Unfortunately, we have a lot of problems in regard to policing in the United States, but I understand the ideal of, like, okay, the government will protect you, and in turn you will pay taxes and obey laws and all that sort of stuff. Sure, understandable. But, like, that's not the definition of a state or a citizen, right? It doesn't involve necessitating the state protect you. It usually involves that because the state wants citizens to survive, because without citizens, what kind of state do you have? But, like, there have been all sorts of states throughout human history that don't really give a shit about the individual in terms of protecting them. They might care about the population as a whole, because, again, if your population dies out because of war or something, then you don't really have a state anymore, do you? But, like, protecting individual rights is not a necessity for something to be considered a state. Like, North Korea is still a state, even though obviously human rights are at the bottom of the list for things they give a shit about. So, I don't understand this tying of, like, caring about protection of the citizens and human rights to the idea of being a citizen of a state. I don't get where that's coming from.
The citizen is a person who, by either birth or naturalization, is a member of a political community. Or society, maybe? I added that in there, it's a question. Owing allegiance to the community and being entitled to enjoy all its civil rights. Look at that, that's hilarious. It doesn't say freedoms, it says civil rights. They just took your freedoms in the social contract and turned them into civil rights. And protections that we have established by the Supreme Court. We do not have a member of the civil state entitled to all its privileges. Okay, so if if we don't have, if they're not obligated to protect us, we have no obligation to an allegiance. So we don't actually have a good social contract, because we're supposed to give up our freedoms to them in exchange for protection. But they're not obligated to give us protection, so that social contract is now a void contract. It has no standing because there's no consideration.
Again, I think he's citing a specific case. I don't remember the specifics, but it's something along the lines of, like, the police don't necessarily have a duty to protect individual citizens. It's their job to uphold the law, right? Meaning, I think something along the lines of, like, it's the police's job to arrest criminals and stop crime. It's not necessarily the job of the police, if there's a shootout, to save individuals in that shootout, right? They're not going to get in trouble if, you know, there's a child in the line of fire and they don't jump in front of them. Something like that. And I agree. I think ideally we would like people who are supposed to enforce the law to have the ideal of protecting the citizenry, but that's not the only way the government protects citizens. I would argue, again, this is depending on the law, because I think there are plenty of laws that are unjust, and our judicial system also is pretty messed up. It's why we have the highest incarceration rate in the world. It's pretty messed up. But, like, the government stopping crime, the government having police, at least theoretically, stop crime generally being considered a bad thing, is protecting the citizenry. Again, let me reiterate, not all the time. Like nonviolent drug offenses. That's stupid and a waste of time and money for everyone involved. But, like, let's say there's a serial killer out and about, or someone who's committing larceny all over the place and they're stealing stuff. If the police are out searching for that person, they are protecting you as a citizen by stopping someone in for society from infringing on your rights, right? Your right to your property. Your right to, like, not have bodily harm perpetrated upon you. Your right to life, if we're talking about the serial killer thing. We have a military, and again, I will reiterate, I think our military budget is too big and we spend too much money on it. But that military is a function of the government protecting its citizenry from outside force, whatever. Like, this idea that the state in no way takes any action to protect citizenry is flawed at best and doesn't really consider, you know, all the things that society does. I don't know.
Okay, so there's no meeting of the minds. Okay, so the citizen no longer exists, which means the political community or political society doesn't exist, which means the state doesn't exist. Thank you, Mark Stevens. You have really pushed this home for the people. Okay, check this out, man. Do you get it yet, people? These people can only govern themselves. They cannot govern you at all whatsoever.
Untrue. The government is sovereign. It has authority over you because they can back that authority up with force. And again, that's sad in some ways, but also it's kind of how society works, right? The government has authority over you because if you don't obey the law, then cops will come and arrest you. They can back their authority up with force. That's kind of where sovereignty and, like, authority come from. Don't get me wrong, we also have the philosophical discussion of, like, oh, the consent of the governed is a huge part of the authority of the state. And I would agree, but practically speaking, outside of the philosophical and the fact that if a government behaves in certain ways that aggrieve the populace, then the populace might rise up and replace said government. Outside of that, the government has authority because they can back up that authority. It's very simple. You can't philosophize your way out of that truth.
It is an absolute fiction. If anybody has an issue with you, they need to stand up on their own claim in an actual court of law, not a fraudulent one, not, you know what I'm saying? If you were damaged, if you suffered, if I violated you have a claim against. No, you come to me, you injured me. Are you going to redress this injury, or am I going to have to take it up somewhere else, to the people? That's what the grand jury was supposed to be for. And it's supposed to be you go into the grand jury with your evidence saying, you know, so-and-so injured me. And then I would be there too, and I'd be saying, no, I didn't, and here's my proof. And then the grand jury decides. That's why the Fifth Amendment was so important to the people back in the day, because the grand jury was there to make sure there's actual jurisdiction going on here. And that's why these states, these state fictions, these faggots in fucking suits pretend to be
come
something they're not,
on,
and they
really?
bypass the grand jury. And they just do what they want. They just pretend they have jurisdiction and authority over you. Right? But they don't. And they can't prove they do, because you have to be a state employee. They require you to be a state employee. You have to be socially contracted. You have to give up your freedoms in exchange for protection, but they don't
Untrue.
protect you. Let's go over it again, people. The citizen is a part of a political community, owing allegiance to the community and being entitled to enjoy all its civil rights and protections. But there is no protections, which means there's no civil rights, which means there's no social contract and privileges. But you're playing along. Why are you playing along? I don't know. You're stupid. So was I. I've been stupid for a long time.
We could agree on that much.
Everybody says, man, it's getting to where this. I mean, if we start protecting each other, we create our own society, our own political unit where we protect ourselves.
I'm gonna start my own society with blackjack and hookers.
Like the gangsters are talking about, the G code. It's not the. It's the grown man code. Be a grown man, a grown woman. Take care of each other. Stop being drama queens and calling these.
Jesus. What's wrong with these people? Seriously. If you haven't already, give my YouTube channel a sub. It's a good time. I put all my streams there and my stream highlights.